The origin of evil is a fascinating thing, and it's one we humans have lived with for years. And for Disney, they have lived with it since the very start, in the most on-the-nose name possible, with the evil queen as their first villain. Everyone notes the generations that came after, the Maleficents, the Scars, whomever you may look at, but they all have their origin point, or origin stories defined by the very character herself and her magic mirror. And it's a fascinating look on how Disney created their first villain, never actually referred to by much except the queen herself, and never having too much screen time until she turns into an old hag. The key, of course, is in the simplicity of Snow White as a movie and the nature of making something feel so complex at the same time. This, we all know, is done through the tale of who is the fairest of them all, a woman obsessed with beauty that it becomes her entire identity, and the mere existence of Snow White is a threat to that very beauty. It is a unique take on the hubris and vanity of people so shallow that beauty cannot be found more than the external nature, rather than the internalness that the magic mirror already knew from the start. And this is the magic of the original Brothers Grimm story that Walt brought to life in his way for the big screen, for the very first time, and the very first type that still remains transformative today. Because who can really note how today's villains are, if not for someone like her? Who can really say they have top-tier villains like Jafar or Ursula if they didn't come from the cloth of the evil queen? Even Entangled, as deliberate as it is for the 50th Disney animated film, it actually does this tribute through Gothel's nature of selfish beauty only kept for herself, all in vain of the same evil queen's nature. Obsession, greed, the drive to be number one, these are the biggest ingredients to all of people's vices and their failures, where the finale shows us something darker in the twist of turning her into someone of who she truly is. So let us go back and praise the simplicity of the first real villain that inspired generations to come. Now, the evil queen's origin stretched back further than Disney itself. In the original Brothers Grimm fairy tale from 1812, she wasn't even really a stepmother at first. She was actually Snow White's own biological mother. And then, of course, the brothers later changed it to a stepmother, finding the idea of a real mother trying to murder their child simply just too dark, even for a time like them. That version was already brutal. The queen demanded Snow White's lungs and liver as proof, and to cook them and eat them, and tried to kill the girl multiple times, and finally landing on the apple before being forced to dance to death in red-hot iron shoes at the wedding. Just going to show you the vanity of some people that was already dark from the start. And Walt Disney took that raw material and reshaped it for the screen. He kept the vanity in the magic mirror, but softened the cannibalism and the multiple murder attempts, setting on one decisive poisoned apple. More importantly, he refused to make her a cartoonish fat, batty comic villain, the very idea that the studio tried, where he wanted something more colder and dangerous. In the earliest days, he described her as stately beautiful, where her face and voice is almost always expressionless. Even when angry or torturing her victims, her voice is low, serene, and cold. He saw her as a mixture of Lady Macbeth and the Big Bad Wolf, beauty that was sinister, mature, and deadly. And unlike Snow White and the Prince, she was never fully rotoscoped. Every frame had to be drawn to capture that regal, restrained menace. The transformation into the old hag became into pure magic than the simple disguise of the original. In production papers, she was sometimes called Grimhilda, a name that never made it into the final film, but later used in other works. Where instead and on screen, she simply remains the queen, cold, nameless, and absolute. Beauty as armor, jealousy as fuel, and the final irreversible fall that still feels earned. The simplicity of her obsession is what makes her last. Everything that came after, every glamorous self-devouring Disney antagonist, starts at this very point, in that mirror, and every decision to make her beautiful enough to believe she could never lose. So from the moment she first appears, the evil queen set a mood that is colder and more controlled than any other Disney villain that followed. She is not theatrical, and she does not rant or monologue for the audience's benefit. She simply is, regal, still wrapped in black and purple, speaking low, almost bored voice that never needs to raise itself to feel dangerous. The castle around her feels less like a home and more like a stage she's already claimed, and the walls are so dark it feels more like a prison. Every gesture is measured, every glance is calculated, and beauty is not something she enjoys, it is something she polices. That is the key to how she thinks. Her entire identity rests on that single fragile claim, that she is the fairest of them all. And the magic mirror is not a confidant or servant in the usual sense, it's the only mirror that cannot lie, and therefore the only thing that can destroy her. When it first names Snow White, something shifts behind those half-closed eyes. The evil queen does not explode, she goes quiet. The threat is no longer abstract, it has a face, a name, and a purity that she cannot replicate. What the mirror is truly talking about is the thing she refuses to understand. Snow White's beauty is not only external, it's the unguarded kindness, the openness, and the complete lack of calculation inside her heart. The queen's beauty is just armor, and Snow White is simply who she is. The mirror is always always noticed, and the queen has never allowed herself to. Her journey throughout the film is slow, and the inevitable collapse of that armor. First comes the huntsman, an attempt to keep her hands clean, to let someone do the ugly work while she remains the elegant queen. When that fails, her mask cracks. The transformation sequence is no longer just a costume change, it is the moment she decides herself that beauty is no longer enough. If she cannot be the fairest, she will become something the fairest cannot survive. The old hag is not a disguise as much as a confession. This is what obsession becomes once the elegance is stripped away. The voice becomes cracked and eager, and the movements become hungry and hunched. Even then, she still believes she is in command. She arrives at the cottage with the poison apple and plays the card of the kindly old woman, offering Snow White the one thing the girl still wants, dreams of a happy ending. And it's an irony that is almost perfect here, where the queen who has built her life on external appearances now uses a false face to destroy the one person whose beauty was never about appearance at all. And by the final storm, the mood has inverted. There's no more poise, there's only desperation, and the dwarfs closing in. The cliff, the lightning, the falling boulder are not just spectacle, they are the logical end of a mind that can only see itself in the mirror's reflection. And when that reflection finally rejected her, there was nowhere left to stand. She began as the most composed presence in the film and ends as the most undone. And through all that, the mirror never changes its answer. It was never about talking to the face she showed to the world, it was talking about the one she refused to look at. And what makes this contrast between the evil queen and Snow White so sharp is how little time we actually spend with the queen in her regal form or her entire total screen time. Most of her presence as the beautiful, composed monarch is just brief, distant, and almost ceremonial. We watch her consult the mirror, issue orders, and disappear into the shadows of her castle. She never makes much of an appearance. Where that version that truly meets Snow White is the one that talks to her, tempts her, touches her, is the hag. And that is no accident. The old hag is not a costume the queen puts on. It is the truth of her, finally allowed to show. The cackling pettiness and the gleeful cruelty as she watched the apple take effect are not new traits. They are always there, held tightly under the black robes and cold expression. Once that beauty is stripped away, what remains is pure unfiltered vanity turned vicious. She is not pretending to be hideous, she simply is. Snow White stands as the complete opposite in her entire character. Her beauty is not armor or performance, it is consistent from the inside out. Kindness, openness, and a quiet faith that the world still holds on to good people are not the traits that has to be forced. They are simply stuff that radiates from her character, the same way her face does. When the hag arrives at the cottage, the collision is almost too perfect. One woman whose entire identity collapses the moment her reflection fails her, and another whose reflection was never the point. This is why the film spends so little time on the elegant queen and so much on the cackling witch. The audience just needs to see the real face of obsession, the pettiness on full display, and the way she savors the moment of Snow White's fall. In those scenes, there is no longer any distance or mystery. The hideous nature is exactly who she is, and the opposite of her stands a girl whose beauty was never something that could be taken because it was never skin. The mirror knew it from the beginning. One of them was the fairest of them all, and the other one was just pretending. The evil queen's death is also the purest examples of hubris in any Disney film, and one of the few where the villain is responsible for their own end. The dwarfs may have driven her up the mountain in a storm, but they did not push her. She slipped and she fell, and the boulder that she intended to crush them with came down on her instead. And this quality, there's almost something biblical in the precision of it all. The same face she has spent her entire life protect the external beauty she believed defined her is smashed beyond recognition. At the same time, the true ugliness of her heart is finally laid bare for everyone to see. The vultures that circle are not just a grim punch sign, they were the last witnesses. No one will ever ask again who is the fairest of them all, because she never returned to the mirror, she never got the chance. And that is the quiet finality of it all. She may have sent Snow White into a death-like sleep, but the act changed nothing about the order of things. The mirror's answer just still stood the entire time, and Snow White remained to be the fairest. The queen's last desperate move only confirmed what has always been true, that her power was never real. It was borrowed, temporary, and entirely dependent on a reflection that had already abandoned her. In the end, she does not get a grand final speech or a moment of tragic self-awareness. She simply falls, clutching the same petty rage that defined her. The storm, the cliff, the boulder, the birds, all are just not random. They are the logical conclusion of a life spent refusing to pass look beyond the surface. Hubris did not only just bring her down, it made sure the fall was hers alone. In the end, the evil queen remains short but simple, and small yet complex. She is the purest definition of villainy, someone who must be opposed simply not because of some grand ideology, but for the sake of their own self. Her wants are just simple, petty, and completely destructive. Beauty, status, and the refusal to share the top, where that is all that takes to become evil. and that is exactly why she became the blueprint. Every Disney villain that followed, whether they sang about it, schemed about power, or twisted love into control, still carries that piece of her, that same core belief of vanity and entitlement dressed into different forms. That she proved that a villain does not need an elaborate backstory or endless screen time, she only needs to want something small enough to feel familiar and dangerous enough to destroy everything around her. She did not invent evil, she simply showed Disney and the rest of us what it looks like when it stares into a mirror and refuses to look away. I'm all done. Goodbye.